You think you know who the police are going to believe when there's a dispute in the family. I thought I knew too. For my entire life, I was taught a very specific set of rules. I believed that if you worked hard, if you followed the law, and if you had the paperwork to prove you were telling the truth, the system would just see things your way. I thought right and wrong were objective facts that any person in a uniform could clearly see. But that belief completely shattered on a Tuesday afternoon in April. I was standing in my parents' driveway, and the sky was so blue it felt like a joke. Two police officers stood between me and the front door. The older one, Officer Daniels, looked like he was carved out of weathered granite. He had this mustache that completely hid his mouth, and he looked incredibly bored. The younger one, Officer Reyes, wouldn't even look me in the eye. He just kept clicking his pen, staring at the oil stains on the concrete. Daniels looked at my papers, then back at me, and said it was a civil matter. He told me that because my mother had a key I'd given her, and because it was my brother who had the car, it wasn't a theft. He called it a family misunderstanding. I stood there holding my registration, feeling my heart hammer against my ribs, and he handed me a flimsy little pamphlet about civil remedies. He told me to go to small claims court or just work it out over Sunday dinner. That was the moment I realized that the people who are supposed to protect you, both your family and the law, can actually become the biggest problem. But to understand why that Tuesday felt like the end of the world, I have to take you back. You have to understand the 20 years of silence that led up to it. You have to understand how I became the easy child, while my brother, Chris, became the son that the rest of us were forced to orbit. Growing up, my mother had this favorite phrase. She used it like a magic spell to end any argument. She'd say, "Equal isn't always fair." She said it when Chris got the larger bedroom because he needed more space to decompress. She said it when Chris got a brand new mountain bike for his 14th birthday, the one with the professional-grade shocks and the disc brakes, while I inherited his old, rusted one because I was responsible and could make it last. I remember looking at that old bike. The chain was orange with rust, and the brakes squeaked like a dying animal every time I tried to slow down. Chris would zoom past me on his new machine, kicking up dirt in my face, and my mom would just smile and say how wonderful it was that Chris finally had a hobby that made him happy. I spent my Saturdays with a wire brush and a can of WD-40, trying to scrub away the neglect off those gears. That was my childhood in a nutshell, scrubbing away the neglect so I wouldn't be a burden. By the time I was 7, I had already mastered the art of being invisible. I saw the stress Chris put on my parents. I saw the way their faces tightened when he had another meltdown. Chris didn't just have moods, he had weather patterns. If he was angry, the whole house was a hurricane. If he was sad, we all drowned in the rain. So I decided to be the lighthouse. I decided to be perfect. I thought if I didn't make waves, I could balance the scales. I remember one Christmas when I was 10. I'd asked for a specific chemistry set, the big one with the Rio glass test tubes and the Bunsen burner. I'd talked about it for months. I read the catalog until the pages were soft. On Christmas morning, I opened a smaller, cheaper version, made of plastic. Chris, meanwhile, opened a high-end electric guitar and a Fender amplifier. I sat there on the carpet, clutching my plastic tubes, while Chris blasted power chords that made the ornaments on the tree rattle. My mom whispered to me later, "I know you wanted the big one, honey, but Chris has had such a hard year with the bullying at school. He needs an outlet. He needs to feel like he's good at something. You're already so smart. You don't need the big kit to be successful. You're our easy one. You understand, right?" I nodded. I always nodded. I took it as a compliment back then, being the easy one. I didn't realize that easy was just another word for expendable. I didn't realize that being the easy child, I was teaching my family that my boundaries didn't exist. I was teaching them that my joy was a luxury, while Chris's joy was a necessity. This pattern didn't stop as we got older. It just got more expensive. In high school, Chris was always the one getting into trouble. Minor things at first, skipping class, getting caught with a vape, failing algebra. Every time, my parents would go into crisis mode. They'd hire tutors, they'd go to meetings with the principal, they'd spend hours at the kitchen table trying to get to the heart of Chris's issues. And me? I was getting straight A's. I was the treasurer of the student council. I had a part-time job at a library. When I brought home my report card, my dad would glance at it and say, "Good job, son. Now, did you see Chris's history grade? We need to figure out a plan." I started to feel like my success was just background noise, a white noise machine that kept the house quiet while they focused on the latest Chris-related fire. When it came time for college, the architecture of inequality was set in stone. Chris had burned through his college fund in one semester at a state school, mostly on parties and a car he eventually crashed. My parents paid for his fresh start at a community college and then another fresh start at a trade school he never finished. When I got into my program, I didn't even ask for help. I knew the bank account was empty. I knew the Chris tax had already been paid. So at 19, I started building my fortress. I worked at a local hardware store during the day and did data entry at night. The hardware store was a special kind of grind. It smelled like sawdust, industrial fertilizer, and the frustrated breath of DIYers who didn't know a wrench from a pliers. I spent my life in aisle 4, explaining the difference between a Phillips head and a flathead screw to people who looked right through me. My hands were always stained with a fine gray grit that no amount of orange-scented soap could quite remove. But every Friday, I walked my check to the bank. My goal was $8,000. That was the magic number for the down payment I needed to afford a car. To my friends, $8,000 was a spring break to Mexico or a used jet ski. To me, it was a fortress. It was the physical proof that I didn't need them. I lived on generic ramen and eggs. I bought my clothes from thrift stores. I wore the same 3 pairs of jeans until the inner thighs wore through, and then I patched them myself with a sewing kit I bought for $2. My parents thought I was being obsessive. My dad would lean against the kitchen counter while I ate my 50-cent dinner and tell me to just buy a beater, some old junker that would get me from A to B. My mom would say I was too focused on ownership and the family was about sharing. She'd look at my spreadsheets and sigh, saying, "You're so rigid, honey. You're always counting pennies. Life is about people, not things."
I didn't argue. I couldn't explain to her that the reason I was counting pennies was because no one was counting them for me. I couldn't explain that the Ford Escape I was dreaming of wasn't just a car. It was the first thing in my life that wouldn't be shared because Chris had a bad day. I remember the nights at the data entry firm. It was a windowless room on the 3rd floor of a converted warehouse. The only sound was the rhythmic, aggressive clicking of 20 keyboards. I didn't see numbers as currency. I saw them as miles. Every 10,000 entries was another week of insurance. Every spreadsheet was another gallon of gas. I would watch the digital glow of my banking app at 2 a.m. on Friday nights. Click. Confirmed. Another $200 in the fund. The day I finally walked onto that dealership lot, I felt like a king. I had the $8,000 in a cashier's check tucked into my pocket. It was the heaviest thing I'd ever carried. When I saw the 2019 Ford Escape in magnetic gray, I knew it was mine. It was used, but it had been loved. 18,000 miles, leather seats, the titanium trim, the upgraded sound system. When I sat in that driver's seat for the first time, I didn't turn on the radio. I just sat there in the silence, smelling the leather and the cleaning chemicals. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I signed the papers alone. No co-signer. No dad's name for a better rate. Just me. It was the first time in 24 years that I owned something that nobody could tell me I had to share. But I forgot one thing. I forgot that in my family, ownership was a suggestion and need was a command. And Chris was always in need. For about 3 months, life was perfect. Every time I walked out to that car, I felt this little jolt of electricity. I kept it spotless. I had this microfiber cloth in the glove box, and if I saw even a speck of dust on the dashboard, I'd buff it out. It was more than a car. It was my proof of concept. It proved that if I stayed quiet and worked hard, I could build something for myself that was separate from the chaos. But my family has a way of sniffing out stability and wanting to take a piece of it. It started on a Tuesday night in July. My mom came over to my apartment unannounced. She was carrying a heavy glass dish wrapped in a kitchen towel. Lasagna. In my house, lasagna wasn't just dinner. It was a peace offering or a bribe. It usually meant someone wanted something. We sat at my small kitchen table, and she kept talking about how proud she was of me. She said I was the only one who really had my life together. And then she hit me with the "I worry" speech. She told me that every time she hears an ambulance, she thinks it might be me. She told me that if I was ever in an accident or if I lost my keys, she'd be helpless to help me. She looked me right in the eyes and said, "Honey, just for emergencies. If you're in the hospital and your car is sitting somewhere getting towed, or if you lose your bag at work, just give me a spare key for my peace of mind. I'm your mother. You can trust me." I felt this deep, sinking feeling in my stomach. Every logical part of my brain was shouting at me to say no. I knew Chris lived 10 minutes away from her. I knew his car was a junker that broke down every other week. I knew my mom couldn't say no to him. But I looked at her, and she looked so sincere. I thought to myself, maybe I'm the being difficult one now. Maybe I'm the one being rigid. So I walked over to the hook by the door, took the spare fob, and handed it to her. I can still hear the sound of those keys jingling as she dropped them into her purse. It sounded like a trap snapping shut. The next morning, I woke up at 6:30. I had a big day at the hardware store, inventory day. I grabbed my coffee, my lunch, and my bag, and I walked out the front door of my apartment building. I was looking at my phone, checking my schedule, and I walked right up to my parking spot. I stopped. I actually dropped my lunch bag. The spot was empty. There was nothing there but a few oil drips and a crumpled gum wrapper. For a second, I thought I was in the wrong row. I looked around, my heart starting to thud in my ears. I walked up and down the entire lot. My car was gone. My first thought was that it had been stolen by a professional. I reached for my phone to call 911, but then I remembered the lasagna. I remembered the keys. I called my mom instead. My hand was shaking so hard I could barely hit the contact name. She picked up on the second ring. She sounded cheerful. "Hi, sweetie, you're up early." "Mom," I said, my voice cracking, "my car is gone. It's not in the lot. Did you take it?" There was this tiny, tiny pause. Then she said, "Oh, honey, I was going to text you. Chris had that huge second interview today. You know, for that warehouse manager position in the valley. It's 40 miles away, and his car wouldn't start this morning. He was so stressed, he was almost in tears. I didn't want to wake you up since I know you've been working those late shifts, so I just drove him over there with the spare key and let him take the Ford. He'll have it back by 5. It's such a big day for him." I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. "Mom, you stole my car. You used the emergency key to give my property to Chris without even asking me." "I didn't steal it," she said, her voice instantly getting sharper. "I'm your mother. I gave you the foundation to even buy that car. We gave you a home and food for 20 years. Don't you dare use that word with me. Chris is your brother. He's family. He needed help, and you weren't using the car right that second. Why are you being so dramatic?" "I have work, Mom. I have inventory today. I have to be there in 20 minutes. "Well, just take a taxi or something. You have all that money saved up. Chris has nothing. He's trying to build a life, and you're worrying about a ride to work? Be the bigger person, honey. He'll be back tonight. I'll even have him fill up the tank." I hung up. I didn't have time to argue. I opened my phone and saw that an Uber to the hardware store was going to cost me $28 because of the morning surge. I sat in the back of that Uber, staring out the window, feeling this burning sensation in my chest. It wasn't just the money. It was the fact that my boundaries didn't exist to her. To my mom, my fortress was just a resource for Chris to use whenever he failed at his own life. 5 o'clock came. I stood out in front of the hardware store, waiting. No car. 6 o'clock. 7. I called Chris. He didn't answer. I texted him, "Bring my car back right now." At 10 p.m., he finally replied, "Sorry, bro, interview ran late, then the hiring manager took me out to a beer to talk salary. Staying at a buddy's place tonight because it's closer to the office for my first day tomorrow. Have it back tomorrow evening for sure. Thanks again. It drives like a dream."
I didn't sleep that night. I just paced my apartment. The next day was the same. The first day was crazy. Gotta stay late. The day after that, traffic is insane. I'll just bring it tomorrow. By day 7, I had spent over $300 on Ubers. I was exhausted. I was falling behind on my own bills, and my boss was starting to give me looks because I was arriving at work stressed and angry. I called my mom again, and this time, I didn't hold back. I told her that if the car wasn't back by noon, I was calling the police and reporting it stolen. The shift in her voice was terrifying. She went from cheerful mom to judge and jury in a heartbeat. "If you call the police on your own brother," she said, "you are dead to this family. Do you understand me? You would ruin Chris's life. Give him a criminal record over a Ford? After everything we've done for you? You're a bully. You've always been a bully. Just because you have a little money, you think you can lord it over us. You're cold and you're selfish, and I didn't raise you to be this way." I realized then that she had completely rewritten the story. In her head, I wasn't the victim of a theft. I was a rich, mean brother who was hoarding a car that Chris needed. On day 10, my dad finally called. My dad usually stays out of it. He's the silent partner in my mom's emotional schemes. He said, "Son, come over for dinner tonight. Let's talk this out like a family. Chris will be there. He'll bring the keys. Let's just put this behind us." I wanted to believe him. I wanted it to be over. I took a $25 Uber to their house. When I walked in, it smelled like pot roast, my favorite. My mom was at the stove, smiling like nothing had happened. Chris was sitting on the couch, my car keys sitting right there on the coffee table. I walked straight for the keys, but Chris grabbed them first. "Whoa, hold on," he laughed. "Let's eat first. Mom worked hard on this." That dinner was the longest 2 hours of my life. My mom spent the whole time talking about Chris's new career. She talked about how he was finally finding himself. She kept saying, "Isn't it wonderful when we all work together?" I didn't eat. I just stared at the keys in Chris's pocket. When the meal was finally over, I stood up. "The keys, Chris, now." My mom's face dropped. "Honey, Chris's first week has been so taxing. He needs to keep the car for just 2 more weeks until his first paycheck comes in. Then he's going to buy that Civic your father found. It's only 2 weeks. You can afford the Ubers. Think of it as an investment in your brother's future." "No," I said. "I am leaving with my car tonight." "I don't actually have it here," Chris said, leaning back and picking at his teeth. "I parked it over at my girlfriend's place a few blocks away because I didn't want to block the driveway. And I've had 2 beers, so I'm not driving you over there. Safety first, right?" He was lying. I knew he was lying. I walked to the front window and looked out. There it was, tucked under a tree 3 houses down. He'd hidden it so I wouldn't see it when I arrived. "I see the car, Chris. Give me the keys or I'm calling 911 right now." My dad stood up then. He didn't look at Chris, he looked at me. "Sit down, son. You're making your mother cry. Is this really who you want to be? The kind of person who calls the cops on his own blood over a piece of metal? If you do this, don't bother coming back for Thanksgiving. Don't bother calling us when you're lonely. You'll be on your own. Is that car worth your family?" I looked at the 3 of them. They were a wall. They had decided that my job was to be the easy one who just took the hit. I didn't call the cops then. I wasn't strong enough yet. I walked out that house, walked 2 miles to a bus stop in the dark, and sat there crying because I realized for 20 years I hadn't been a son to them. I'd been an insurance policy. By day 16, I had spent $600 on ride shares. I was going to be short on rent. I went to the police station. And that brings us to the moment in the driveway with Officer Daniels. "It's a civil matter," he said. I watched the police cruiser pull away, and I felt this absolute crushing weight of helplessness. My mother stood on the porch and smirked at me. "See," she whispered, "nobody likes a snitch. Now stop being a child and go home." I got into my Uber, and the driver was this older guy. He saw me shaking. He asked me if I was okay. I ended up telling him the whole thing. The keys, the lasagna, the police. He looked at me in the rearview mirror and said, "Kid, the law doesn't care about your feelings. It only cares about what you can prove. My sister tried to steal my house once. The cops said the same thing to me. You know what fixed it? I got her on tape admitting she knew the house wasn't hers. Once it's on tape, the family matter excuse dies." I sat up straight. I realized I'd been fighting an emotional war with people who had no emotions for me. I needed to start fighting a legal war. I called my friend Sarah, the paralegal. "Sarah, tell me everything I need to know about one-party consent and the crime of conversion. I'm done being the easy child. Sarah didn't just give me legal advice, she gave me a job to do. She told me that the reason the police walked away was because they didn't see a criminal mind. They saw a mother who thought she was helping and a brother who was just being a flake. She said that as long as it stayed in that blurry emotional territory, I would never get my car back. I had to move the goalposts. I had to force them into a position where they had to admit out loud that they were intentionally keeping my property against my will. I spent the next 3 nights in a state of clinical preparation. I didn't go to the hardware store for my extra shifts. I didn't hang out with friends. I sat in the local library because my apartment felt too small and too quiet. I sat at one of those clunky public computers and I researched the specific statutes for my state. I looked up conversion of property. I looked up unauthorized use of a motor vehicle. And most importantly, I looked up the one-party consent laws for recording. I found the statute, 18.2-67. In my state, as long as I was a participant in the conversation, I could record it without telling the other person. It felt dirty. It felt like I was becoming the person my mother always accused me of being, cold and calculating. But then I looked at my banking app. I looked at the $740 I had spent on Ubers in less than 2 weeks. I looked at the rent overdue notice sitting on my kitchen counter. The guilt evaporated. You can't eat family loyalty, and you can't pay rent with sharing. I bought a recording app for my phone. I didn't want to use the standard voice memo tool because I needed something that would show a clear timestamp and wouldn't compress the audio so much that the voice was unrecognizable. I spent an hour testing it. I recorded myself walking around. I recorded myself whispering. I recorded myself yelling. I needed to make sure that no matter how loud my mother got, her words would be crystal clear. Then I wrote a script. I didn't want to wing it. I knew my mother better than anyone. I knew that the second I started talking, she would try to derail me. She would bring up my childhood.
Would bring up how much she struggled when I was a baby. She would tell me I was being a bully. I had to stay on track. I had to hit 3 specific points. I had to identify the car. I had to make a formal demand for its return, and I had to get her to say no. On Saturday morning, the 20th day since my car disappeared, I sat at my kitchen table. I had a glass of water, a pen, and my script. I hit the record button on my laptop as a backup, and then I hit record on my phone. My hands were shaking so much I had to grip the edge of the table. My heart was thumping in my throat. I felt like a traitor, but I also felt like a man who was finally, for the first time in 24 years, putting on his own oxygen mask first. I dialed her number. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "Hi, sweetie," she said. Her voice was that high-pitched, performative, cheerful tone she always used when she was trying to act like everything was fine. "I was just thinking about you. I'm at the grocery store getting things for that potato salad you love. You're coming over for Sunday lunch tomorrow, right? Chris says he wants to tell you all about his first full week at the warehouse." I took a deep breath. I looked at my script. "Mom," I said. My voice sounded deeper than usual. "I am not calling about lunch. I am calling to make a formal demand for the return of my property. My 2019 Ford Escape, magnetic gray, with the VIN number ending in 4291. The silence on the other end was absolute. I could almost hear her brain resetting. The cheerful mom persona was being deleted, and the defender of Chris was loading in. "Excuse me?" she said. The sweetness was gone. "A formal demand? Where did you get that kind of language? Have you been talking to some lawyer? Are you really going to treat your own mother like a defendant? I am giving you and Chris until 6 p.m. tomorrow, Sunday, to have that car parked in my driveway with the keys in my mailbox," I continued. I didn't let her interrupt. I stayed on the script. "It has been 20 days. I have spent over $700 on transportation. I am falling behind on my rent. This car is my sole legal property, and I am demanding its return." "You are being so incredibly cruel," she snapped.
I could hear her putting groceries into her cart with aggressive thuds. Chris is finally doing something with his life. He is a manager, honey, a manager. He cannot show up to a warehouse in a taxi. It would be humiliating. He needs that car to build his confidence. Why can't you see that? You have so much. You've always been the lucky one. Everything comes easy to you. Why do you have to begrudge your brother this one thing? It didn't come easy to me, Mom. I worked 2 jobs, I lived on ramen, I saved for 2 years. This wasn't luck, it was work. Well, maybe you worked too hard, she said, her voice dripping with contempt. Maybe it turned you into this cold, rigid person. You're so obsessed with mine and yours. It's a sickness, honey. It really is. We are a family. We share. That car belongs to the family because we are the ones who made you who you are. So you are refusing to return the car by 6 p.m. tomorrow? I'm not refusing anything, she yelled. I'm protecting your brother. I'm telling you that the car stays with him until he gets his first paycheck. That's in 2 weeks. After that, he'll buy a car and you'll get yours back. It's 14 days. If you can't handle 14 days to help your own blood, then I don't know who you are anymore. I don't think I even want you at my table tomorrow. Mom, look at what you're saying. You're saying that your need to help Chris justifies stealing from me. It isn't stealing. I have the key. You gave me the key. That means I have permission, and I am giving that permission to Chris. That is my final word on this. Don't call me again with this formal demand nonsense. It's pathetic. Click. She hung up. I sat there in the silence, my phone still buzzing in my hand. I felt a wave of nausea, followed by a surge of adrenaline. I hit the stop button on the recording app. I immediately saved the file to 3 different cloud drives. I emailed it to Sarah. I emailed it to myself. I had it. I had the admission that she had the key. I had the admission that she was the one controlling where the car was, and I had the direct verbal refusal to return it after a formal demand. The family matter fog had just been cleared. I spent the rest of Saturday and all Sunday in a strange kind of limbo. I didn't leave my apartment. I didn't want to risk being out and missing a surprise return of the car, though I knew it wasn't coming. I watched the clock. 5 p.m., 5:30, 5:45. At 6 p.m., I walked down to the mailbox. Empty. I looked at my parking spot. Empty. I went back upstairs, took a shower, and laid out my clothes for Monday morning. I didn't lay out my hardware store uniform. I laid out a button-down shirt and my best pair of slacks. I wasn't going to work. I was going to the police station. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard my mother's voice. You're a cold, rigid person. You're a monster. You're no son of mine. I realized that by recording her, I had officially stepped out of the easy child role. I had become the antagonist in their story. But as I lay there, looking at the ceiling, I realized that I'd rather be the villain in their story than a ghost in my own.
Monday morning at 8 a.m., I was standing in the lobby of the precinct. I didn't go to the front desk officer this time. I knew from my research that I needed to talk to someone with the authority to actually open a case file. I asked to speak with a watch commander or a patrol sergeant. The officer at the desk looked at my shirt and my neat manila folder and didn't give me the usual brush off. What's this regarding? I am here to follow up on a previous report regarding a vehicle theft, I said, my voice as flat and professional as I could make it. I was previously told it was a civil matter, but I have since gathered evidence of criminal conversion and intentional unlawful use of a vehicle. I have the statutes here, and I have the recorded evidence of the refusal to return the property. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in a small, glass-walled room with Sergeant Miller. He was a man who looked like he had seen everything and was tired of most of it. He opened my folder and started flipping through the pages. The title, the registration, the printout of the one-party consent law, the 19 days of Uber receipts. a long, depressing strip of paper that showed exactly how much this family matter was costing me. "You've been busy," Miller said, looking over his spectacles at me.
"I was told that the police couldn't act because there was a presumption of permission," I said, "because my mother had a key. I am here to show you that the permission has been formally revoked and that the property is being held with the intent to deprive me of its use." I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table between us. I played the recording. Hearing my mother's voice in that sterile, fluorescent-lit police station felt surreal. It sounded like it was coming from another planet. The sergeant sat perfectly still as she yelled about Chris being a manager. He didn't move as she told me to go buy a new one. But when she said the words, "The Ford stays with him, that is my final word," Miller's eyes sharpened. He hit pause on my phone. "Okay," he said. He didn't say it like he was happy. He said it like a man who had just found a missing puzzle piece under the couch. "That changes the color of the sky, doesn't it?" "Does it satisfy the requirement for criminal intent?" I asked. Miller nodded slowly. "She's admitting she has control of the vehicle. She's admitting she's the one denying you access, and she's doing it after you gave her a clear, time-stamped deadline. That's not a misunderstanding anymore. That's a choice." He stood up and took my manila folder. "Stay here. I need to make a phone call and see who's on patrol in the North District. You said your brother is at a warehouse?" "Yes," I said. I handed him the address I had spent Sunday evening tracking down. "He should be there until 5 p.m. Miller looked at the address, then back at me. "You're sure about this? Once I send a unit down there, there's no oops sorry button. If the car is there and he has the keys, he's in the system." "I'm sure," I said. "He's had 20 days to be a brother. Now he has to be a citizen." The wait in that police station was a special kind of torture. Sergeant Miller had gone into a back office, and I was left sitting on a hard plastic chair that was bolted to the floor. There was a clock on the wall above the vending machine that ticked with a heavy metallic thud every second. I stared at it until the numbers started to blur. I looked at the other people in the lobby. A woman crying quietly into a tissue, a man with a bandaged hand, 2 officers laughing about a football game. To them, it was just another Monday morning. To me, it felt like I was sitting in the middle of a collapsing building. I kept thinking about Chris. I wondered what he was doing at that exact moment. Was he sitting in his new office feeling like a big shot? Was he out in the parking lot, leaning against my magnetic gray paint, showing off his new car to his coworkers? I felt a pang of guilt, deep and cold. I thought about the look on my mother's face when the police showed up at the warehouse. I knew she would never forgive me. I knew that by sitting in this chair, I was effectively ending my relationship with the only family I had. But then I reached into my pocket and touched the folded-up Uber receipts. I thought about the $700. I thought about the nights I spent working 2 jobs while Chris was out partying. I remembered the way my mother laughed when I made that formal demand. The guilt didn't go away, but it got quieter. It was replaced with a grim, heavy sense of duty. I wasn't doing this to be mean. I was doing this because I was finally worth defending. About 2 hours later, Sergeant Miller walked back out. He didn't look triumphant. He just looked like he'd finished a chore. He was holding a set of keys. My keys. The Ford fob was scuffed, and there was a new, cheap plastic keychain attached to it that said "Manager" in gold letters. I felt a surge of nausea seeing it. "We found him," Miller said. He sat down across from me and slid the keys over the table. "2 of my guys went down to the warehouse. Your brother was in the break room. When they told him they were there about the Ford, he tried to play it off. He told them that the same thing your mom told you, that it was a family matter and he had permission. But then my guys did exactly what I told them to do. They played him the 30-second clip of your mother's refusal. They told him that because she had explicitly denied the return of the vehicle after a formal demand, he was now in possession of stolen property. They told him he was looking at a felony auto theft charge and that they were going to cuff him right there in front of his new boss." I swallowed hard. Did they? Did they arrest him? He didn't give them the chance, Miller said, and there was a hint of disgust in his voice. The second they mentioned the word felony, your brother folded like a card table. He didn't defend your mother. He didn't talk about family loyalty. He immediately told the officers that our mom had forced the car on him. He said he told her it was a bad idea, but she insisted. He signed a voluntary statement on the spot, basically throwing your mother under the bus to save his own skin. He handed over the keys and walked the officers out to the lot. He's not in jail, but he's definitely not a manager anymore. The warehouse manager saw the whole thing and fired him on the spot. Said he couldn't have that kind of drama at his facility. I took the keys. They felt cold. What about my mom? The report is being filed. Because she admitted to being the one in control of the keys and the one refusing the return, she could be looking at a charge for conspiracy or aiding and abetting. It'll be up to the district attorney to decide if they want to pursue it. Honestly, most of the time they don't, especially with family. But the paper trail is there now. If she ever tries something like this again, she's in the system. You're free to go, kid. Your car is in the impound lot across the street. I've already authorized the release. I walked out of the station and across the street. The sun was high and hot now, reflecting off the asphalt. The impound lot was a grim place, surrounded by chain-link fence and barbed wire. I handed over my ID, signed a few forms, and then the attendant pointed to a row of vehicles in the back. There it was, my fortress. I walked up to it and my heart sunk. I had spent $8,000 on this car. I had polished it every single Sunday. But after 20 days with Chris, it looked like a dumpster. There were dried mud splots up the side of the doors. The wheels were caked in brake dust. But it was when I opened the door that I really felt the violation. The smell hit me first. It was a mix of stale fast food grease, cheap cigarettes, and that heavy, cloying cologne Chris always wore. The floorboards were covered in empty soda cups and crumpled up wrappers. But the worst part was the passenger seat. There was a huge, dark coffee stain right in the middle of the leather, the kind of stain that comes from someone spilling a jumbo latte and just letting it soak in. My microfiber cloth, the one I used to buff the dashboard, was lying on the floor, covered in grease. I sat in the driver's seat, and I just gripped the steering wheel. I didn't turn the engine on. I just sat there in the heat and the smell, and I cried. I wasn't crying because I was happy to have the car back. I was crying because of the sheer, casual disrespect of it all. Chris hadn't just used my car.
He had treated it like it was nothing. He had treated my 2 years of hard work like a disposable toy. I drove it straight to a professional detailing shop. I told them I wanted the deep clean package. I told them I wanted every single molecule of that smell gone. I paid another $150, money I didn't really have, but I couldn't bear the thought of sitting in that smell for one more minute. As I was sitting in the waiting room of the detail shop, my phone started to vibrate. It was like a bomb going off. The first message was from my mom. It was all in capital letters. "What did you do? The police came to Chris's work. He lost his job. They fired him in front of everyone. You are a monster. You have destroyed your brother's life over a piece of metal. I hope you are proud of yourself. Do not ever call me again." 5 minutes later, a text from my dad. I never thought I'd see the day where one of my sons would record his own mother to send his brother to jail. You've broken her heart. You've broken this family. We are changing the locks today. Don't bother coming for the holidays. You aren't part of this family anymore. Then came the flying monkeys. That's a term I learned later in therapy. It's when a toxic person sends other people to do their dirty work. My Aunt Martha called me, screaming about how I was ungrateful. My cousin texted me, saying I was cold-blooded and litigious. The narrative had been set. In their version of the story, Chris was a hero trying to start a career, and I was a jealous, wealthy villain who had used a sneaky legal trick to sabotage him. They didn't mention the 20 days. They didn't mention the $700. They didn't mention that Chris had thrown our mom under the bus the second the cops showed up. To them, the only sin was the fact that I had stood up for myself. In a toxic family, the easy child is only loved as long as they stay easy. The second you have a boundary, the second you say no, you become the enemy. Because by saying no, you are forcing them to look at their own behavior, and they would rather destroy you than do that. I spent the next week in a kind of nuclear winter. I blocked all of them. I had to. Every time my phone buzzed, I felt this surge of cortisol that made my hands shake. I went back to work at the hardware store. I walked into aisle 4, and I smelled the sawdust, and for the first time, it felt like home. It was honest work. It was a world where a Phillips head screw was always a Phillips head screw, and it didn't try to tell you it was a flathead just to make you feel guilty. It's been a year now. I still have the Ford. The stain on the seat is almost invisible now, but I know exactly where it is. Every time I get into the car, I look at that spot. It's a reminder. It's a scar. I haven't spoken to my parents or Chris since that day at the detail shop. I heard through an old family friend that Chris is back to living in their basement. The warehouse job was his last best chance, and he blew it. So now he's back to being the victim of my cruelty. My mom still tells everyone at church about her difficult son who chose a car over his own mother. Sometimes I'll be sitting in my apartment, the one I can finally afford the rent on because I'm not spending my income on Ubers, and I'll feel this wave of sadness. I'll see a Ford Escape on the road and think about the Sunday dinners. I'll think about the lasagna. I'll wonder if I should have just let it go. Maybe $600 was a small price to pay for peace. But then I remembered the recording. I play it back sometimes when I'm feeling weak. I listen to my mother's voice. The Ford stays with him. That is my final word. And I realized that the peace I would have bought was a lie. It was just the silence of my own slow disappearance. If you're listening to this and you're the easy child in your family, I want you to hear me. You aren't being good by letting them walk all over you. You're just being a floor, and people don't respect floors. They just wipe their feet on them. Protecting yourself isn't a betrayal of family. Family is supposed to be the place where you don't have to protect yourself. If you find yourself having to build fortresses, having to print out statutes, and having to record your own mother just to keep what you earned, then you don't have a family. You have a hostage situation. I'm not the easy child anymore. I'm the villain in their story, and I'm perfectly fine with that, because the villain gets to drive his own car. The villain gets to pay his own rent, and the villain is the only one who knows where the keys are kept. Know the laws in your state, keep your receipts, and never ever give out a spare key to someone who thinks equal isn't fair, because the only person who is going to look out for you at the end of the day is the person you see in the rear view mirror, and that person deserves a fortress.